of the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries is a source of enjoyment for millions of people who live, work, and play along their banks. The nation's largest estuary, the Chesapeake Bay, drains more than 64,000 square miles of land, receiving roughly 70,000 cubic feet of water every second. The bay is home to more than 2,700 species and is a major commercial and recreational resource for the people of Virginia. In the 1950s, scientists began to notice a decline in the Chesapeake Bay's water quality and living resources. In the late 1970s, state and federal scientists began an extensive study to determine the reasons for the bay's decline. Many problems were identified. 4 critical problems that have adverse effects on water quality are excess nutrients from wastewater, agricultural lands, developed land, and fertilized lawns, sediment runoff from farms, construction sites, and eroding lands, elevated levels of toxic substances, and pathogens from human and animal waste, such as bacteria and viruses. Types of pollution are generally categorized as either point or non-point sources. Point sources include discharges from sewage treatment plants and industrial or commercial activities. Much of the initial bay cleanup effort focused on upgrading the pollutant removal capability of sewage treatment plants and other point sources. Point source pollution has declined thanks to technology and regulation. Initial pollution prevention efforts did not address non-point source pollution. As a result, non-point source pollution is a major contributor to the decline in the bay's water quality. Furthermore, non-point source pollution is increasing as population and development in the bay watershed increases. Non-point sources of pollution come from widespread stormwater runoff, atmospheric deposition, groundwater, and other sources. Generally speaking, non-point source pollution is caused by rainfall moving over the land surface and through the ground, ultimately transporting pollutants into streams, rivers, and the bay. Impervious areas such as driveways, parking areas, swimming pools, and even houses contribute to non-point source pollution by preventing rainwater from infiltrating through the ground and being cleaned by the soil's natural processes.
The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the United States. The watershed, or land area that drains into the bay, covers about 64,000 square miles and is found in all or parts of 6 states in the mid-Atlantic. The bay itself and its tributaries cover about 7,000 square miles. The interaction between the land area and the water area occurs along a tidal shoreline which in Virginia covers more than 5,000 miles. The transfer of materials from the land to the water across this shoreline is what affects both the water quality and the habitat quality in the bay and the tidal waters of Virginia.
The Bay program has identified excessive amounts of nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, and sediment as being the major causes of water quality problems in the bay. This can cause algae blooms that will shade out the underwater grasses that need light, and later in the cycle those algae can also sink to the bottom and they'll be decomposed. That uses up the dissolved oxygen in the water. The sediment, which runs off of forested, agricultural, residential lands, can also shade those underwater grasses, and so now the Bay program is working very hard to try and reduce these excessive amounts of nutrients and sediment that are going into the bay.
One way to minimize these non-point sources of pollution is to wisely manage land uses and development. In 1983, the governors of Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, the mayor of the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency signed an agreement to work together to try to solve the problems of the Chesapeake Bay. In 1988, the Virginia General Assembly enacted the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. The Bay Act established a cooperative program between state and local governments aimed at reducing non-point source pollution in tidewater localities. The cornerstone of the Bay Act is the Resource Protection Area, which in addition to the body of water and wetlands, includes a minimum 100-foot buffer area adjacent to and upland of creeks, rivers, streams, tidal wetlands, tidal shorelines, and other environmental features. Buffers filter pollutants from runoff and slow the speed of the water running off the land, which reduces the amount of soil erosion. Buffers also help remove excess nutrients from the groundwater, which is a major source of pollution found in the Chesapeake Bay. In order to be most effective, the buffer area should contain a mixture of vegetation, such as trees, shrubs, and ground cover.
Riparian forest buffers are critical to the health of our streams, rivers, and Chesapeake Bay itself. They provide benefits to both the landowner and the general public. Benefits include increased property value, reduction in non-point source pollution, and wildlife habitat. It is essential that we develop and continue to cultivate a strong land stewardship ethic among landowners and stakeholders alike.
By implementing the buffer requirements of the Bay Act, local governments are preserving and protecting critically important buffers. However, the degradation of existing buffers in Tidewater, Virginia, is a constant threat to the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. That's why it's important for landowners, realtors, developers, and others who live and work along the Bay's streams and waterways to work closely with their local government to protect and manage buffer areas. The Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act regulations require the 100-foot buffer be maintained in a manner that retards runoff, prevents erosion, and filters non-point source pollution from runoff. The best way to meet these water quality requirements is to ensure that the 100-foot buffer is established and maintained in native woody vegetation. Buffer management involves a number of different issues. The law permits certain activities within the buffer area, as long as the required water quality functions of the buffer are preserved.
Under the regulations, a 100-foot vegetated buffer must be preserved where it exists and must be established where it does not. Modifications may be permitted within the buffer area based on certain criteria established by each local government. A healthy vegetated buffer like this one should consist of the 3 trophic layers, including a herbaceous layer with grasses, an understory with shrubs and small trees, as well as a thick tree canopy. All permitted activities within the 100-foot buffer, such as woodlot management, sight lines and vistas, access paths such as this one, and shoreline erosion control structures, should all be designed to minimize impacts to the vegetation within the buffer. Accessory structures, such as pools, decks, gazebos, are normally not allowed by right within the buffer area. If a property owner has a lot that's vacant and was platted prior to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, they may also be able to construct their principal structure or their house, assuming there is no other place to put the house on the lot. Again, the local government needs to administer that process. For shoreline erosion control structures, trees and woody vegetation may be removed if the project is deemed necessary and if it's based on best technical advice. A locality must review a water quality impact assessment for these projects, and replacement vegetation may need to be put in place to stabilize the shoreline. The regulations do permit certain activities to occur within the buffer area. Development of access paths, reasonable sight lines and vistas, shoreline erosion control structures, and also general woodlot management is permitted within the buffer. So it's critical that property owners first call their local governments.
Shoreline erosion control structures, such as riprap and bulkhead, are an allowed water-dependent use within the resource protection areas, provided they meet the following criteria. Land disturbance must be minimized. Existing vegetation must be preserved. The erosion control methods are necessary and based on best available technical advice. And appropriate land stabilization and buffer vegetation are established after project completion. Of course, there are activities and uses that are not permitted in resource protection areas. They include new development, additions to existing principal structures built after the date the Bay Act program was adopted, parking lots, secondary structures such as sheds, gazebos, and pools, clear-cutting tree removal, filling and grading activities, establishing lawns. Non-compliance with resource protection area requirements is a violation of the local CBPA program and can result in penalties. Violators will be required to restore the buffer in accordance with local guidelines. It's important to identify resource protection areas and buffers early in the process of land development.
This is Creekside Landing, a 265-lot community that's being developed along Queens Creek in York County. This project is being built on a 210-acre parcel of land that was heavily impacted by tidal wetlands and steep slopes. By utilizing the cluster or open space provision in the York County zoning ordinance, we were able to design a project that has minimized the environmental impact by putting all of the developable property on the least environmentally sensitive land and preserving all of the slopes and Chesapeake Bay buffers in their natural state.
Likewise, landowners should learn the specifics of their responsibilities for protecting buffers.
Kathy, I really like what you have done with your garden.
Thanks so much.
I noticed that you have really spent a lot of time making sure that you've preserved this buffer zone.
We really have. We've kept the trees along the riprap, a lot of the plants that were in the woods, and we've really added to them a diversity of plants that will attract birds, bees, and butterflies and give us flowers and foliage throughout the growing season.
Well, I've noticed all these pine needles here in the buffer zone. They help to absorb the water as it falls to the ground, thus reducing the amount of lawn that you have to cut.
Oh, you bet. We've cut way back on the lawn because it just uses too many chemicals and fertilizers and things that ultimately pollute the waterways. And it gives us more places to plant and to have more fun, and again, places for the wildlife to enjoy and get shelter.
The Chesapeake Bay Local Assistance Department, or CBLAD, provides technical assistance to local governments which enforce the local Chesapeake Bay Act regulations. For more about buffers and how to manage them, or to find out the requirements in your locality, call your local government. Or for more information, you can call CBLAD at 1-800-CHES-BAY. Remember, the Chesapeake Bay Act is a locally adopted and enforced program. Your local government's approval is required before you remove or disturb vegetation or engage in any development activity. If you aren't sure whether you have a resource protection area on your property, contact your local government to find out.
The Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act recognizes the importance of vegetated buffers along our waterways as a means of controlling nutrient pollution, the leading cause of poor water quality in the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. The health of the bay is affected by your action. The cumulative impact of acres and acres of lawns being treated with chemicals and fertilizers, along with sediment runoff, is impeding the recovery of the bay and its tributaries. The implementation of the Bay Act is important, not only to agriculture, developers, treatment plants, and regulators. It's the individual property owners that have a large impact on maintaining and improving the vegetated buffers along our waterways. The Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act provides benefits to all whose livelihoods and quality of life are tied to this national estuarine treasure.
The Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries are natural resources that benefit all who live near them. By working together to protect the wetlands and buffer areas that border these waterways, we will make it possible to enjoy their beauty and bounty for generations to come.